Good evening. Good evening and welcome. My name is John Mitchell. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Engineering Education. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for Mark's inaugural lecture. So Mark McBride Wright is a recognised diversity and inclusion leader who speaks about psychological safety in inclusive teams. He has a master's degree and a PhD from Imperial College, which we don't hold against him, and is a chartered chemical engineer specialising in health and safety, particularly in the oil and gas industries. In 2015, he co-founded the not-for-profit organisation InterEngineering to support and represent the perspectives of LGBTQ+ engineers, something that's been hugely successful and I'm sure will be mentioned tonight. But he is also the founder and managing director of EqualEngineers, a company offering a wide range of diversity and inclusion consultancy and training. He speaks on masculinity in engineering, inclusive leadership, and LGBTQ+ issues within engineering, and has trained thousands of engineers on inclusive leadership. He's won numerous awards and prizes, been a founding member of the IChemE's Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, and is recipient of the Royal Academy of Engineering's most prestigious award, the Rook Award for Public Promotion of Engineering. In October 2022, he joined the Centre for Engineering Education as the Royal Academy of Engineering Visiting Professor in Inclusive Engineering Leadership. And under that guise, we're delighted to welcome him tonight to give his inaugural lecture. Professor Mark McBride Wright, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks. First time I've been called professor. Wow. Can you all hear me all right? Brilliant. So it's great to be here in the room and see familiar faces that transect through my entire career and touch on different points in my career. So you've all been, those of you in the room who know me and have been part of this development, this has been a journey we've all been on together, and let's see where we can keep going with it. And so what I'm going to present to you today is a intersection, I guess, through the collective learnings to date, and then a sort of vision for change for at the end. So a bit about me, a bit about this journey into interest in inclusion and diversity, a bit about the company, EqualEngineers, that I run, and then some work on our work in the higher education space and how I'm hoping to bring some of this learning to my time here at UCL. So I started off my career in engineering, moving to Imperial when I was 17 years old, starting my MEng in 2005. Through that journey, I discovered a love for energy, and it was through running that course and through doing my internships during my undergraduate that I decided to specialise and do a PhD in carbon capture and storage in CCS. Spending some time in industry, spending some time in academia, I enjoyed it, but after spending 8 years of my life at a single institution, I decided I needed to broaden my wings and see the world. And I really, really enjoyed safety engineering as part of my undergraduate degree. And I found when I was coming to the end of my PhD, I was actually reflecting a lot on what I'd done 4 years prior to help decide what my next journey would be, my next stepping stone. And so I decided to apply for some roles in safety and risk consulting and managed to secure a position at Environmental Resources Management, working in their technical safety and risk team. I was there for about 9 months, wrote my PhD up whilst working there, and I realised that I wasn't close enough to the action, I wasn't close enough to the layer, and I realised that the energy sector is a bit like an onion. You've got the vendors, the big companies that spend at the heart of it, the oil and gas majors. And then you have a secondary layer that is engineering construction, where the design is done. That's where engineers really are at the heart of doing the design work, And the tertiary consultancies, which ERM was, essentially their consultancies that then support the sector, support the end clients. But when you're an undergraduate going through your degree, you kind of get emblazoned by all these brands that come to you, and you think that where you ought to work is at one of the majors, but actually there's so much more opportunity that exists in that secondary layer of the onion. So I applied to KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root, one of those engineering construction companies, and I was lucky to secure a role in Granherne in their risk and safety team, which was essentially a small subsidiary within the business of about 200 people globally in the much larger organisation of 23,500 at the time. I think now they're 30-odd thousand because they've grown and diversified into the space sector. But this really was the cycle of where I got to before launching my business. Now, when finishing in 2013, when you've been working in a lab long hours, and then you move into a consulting job in industry, it's like you've got a lot of time on your hands. 9 till 5. What is a 9 till 5 job? I had all this kind of extra desire to do stuff. So it was round about then that I got more involved with my professional engineering institution, the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and got involved with the London South East member group. And used to spend quite a bit of our time here at UCL, where we used to host our meetings for the member group. And it was in that member group that we piloted a diversity and inclusion survey. And it was the first time I discovered diversity in engineering. However, I discovered it was very centered on the experiences of cisgendered women in engineering. And being a gay man, I never saw anything that represented myself. So I decided to set up an organisation called InterEngineering. And the stars sort of aligned in 2013-14 at that point, because it was when Jenny at the front here ran an event whilst she was head of diversity and inclusion at the Royal Academy of Engineering called Data-Driven Diversity, the facts about being LGBT in engineering. And Peter and I, Pete here, who's one of my co-founders at InterEngineering, we attended that event and were both, that moment of transcendence almost. Just something had to come out of the back of that event rather than just a set of bullet points that sit on a web page that never get looked at again. So we decided to get together, us and two others, and formed what essentially the aspiration was to become, like the Women's Engineering Society is for gender, to become that for sexual orientation and gender identity. To have something that would stick with us, independent of whoever our employer was at the time, and we could really invest in and grow through. So that's what we did. So we set up InterEngineering to connect, inform, and empower LGBTQ+ engineers and supporters. And I still oversee the running of that organisation. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that in a moment. However, a few years into that journey, I noticed a need to step up a level in diversity, broaden out and create a brand that would apply equal focus to each strand of diversity, and hence the idea for EqualEngineers. So something that would focus on sexual orientation, something on gender, something on ethnic minority, something on disability, neurodiversity, so on and so forth. And that's where the idea for EqualEngineers came. And through that, we do training, events, consulting, and recruitment. I've served as an external advisor to the RAE for 4 years, from 2017 to 2021. And through our consulting work, we've helped develop diversity strategies and give training to many different types of organisations, different institutions as well, along the way. So a bit about InterEngineering. So here's a timetable of what we went through. We launched it in 2014. We started off doing panel discussions down here in London. We ran 3 panel discussions, all of which are recorded and are still on our YouTube channel. And when we recognised that a regional model would be needed to really address the interest that was coming up through our member groups. So I think we ended up getting to about 6 regional groups by 2019, having a North Wales group. But some key milestones along the way were in 2016, being asked to write a report with Lord Brown on homophobia in engineering, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in engineering, which we launched at the House of Commons then. And there's a statistic that we unearthed in that report that I keep seeing played back to us even so many years later. One of our most successful projects was a set of videos that we did with the Royal Academy of Engineering and Mott MacDonald, where we profiled 19 engineers showcasing their experiences of what it's like being LGBT in engineering. And then we've also produced a series of good practice guides in partnership with industry, supporting bisexual engineers, embedding D&I in the supply chain, and we also did a transitioning in the workplace guide that was developed by trans engineers with Stonewall. And then when COVID hit, we realized we had to adopt a more regional model. So we did a digital model. So we created a festival called Re-Engineering Pride. And since then, we've maintained that. The need for the network is still there, but we are very much more of a digital network now. There are plans to bring InterEngineering under the EqualEngineers umbrella so that it can then benefit from the resources that we have as a business with an events team to properly underpin the actions that have taken place. But to give you an idea of success, along this journey, we had this aspiration to have 12 regional groups by 2020 across the country. But we realized what we were becoming was an incubator for LGBTQ plus talent. So you'd get an LGBT engineer who'd rock up and say, I want to be a co-chair of a new regional group, can you help me set it up? We'd go about doing that, but then because LGBTQ inclusion has evolved over the last 10 years, their employer would then say, we want you to set up a network. So then an individual only has a finite amount of resource that they can give, so they go straight to their network at their employer and then set about shaping up networks at their employer. And it's through us that we've been the incubator in the background between big networks like Pride at Airbus, where we've essentially worked with them in the background, going from a very small network where their headquarters in Toulouse wouldn't even fly a rainbow flag for fear of, the internal politics that would bring about, to in 2017 or 18, when India was looking at recriminalising homosexuality, Airbus actually used its political might as a big employer in the sector at the time and said, no, we won't stand for this. And it therefore didn't happen. Not because of that stance, but the fact is we've helped engineers within their respective employers go on that growth journey, navigate that red tape, that politics, that pushback that you often get, and help making it forward. And here are just some pictures. So this was our first ever event at WSP's offices in London, where we launched it. We've exhibited at numerous careers fairs. We've marched down Pride in London. We've been active, had an active presence at many different Pride festivals. Probably one of my highlights actually has been when we've been walking down some big festivals and then seeing lots of positive feedback come through from people. This was us walking down Piccadilly shortly after the Orlando massacre, actually. So there was a massacre that happened in Orlando in the Pulse nightclub, where 50-odd members of the gay community were murdered by a shooter. And that really sent shockwaves through the entire community globally. There were vigils held everywhere. So we thought it appropriate to sort of have some points commemorating on that whilst we were there. Now, running InterEngineering, I really noticed the importance of having that spotlight on a specific minority group. But this concept on evolution of D&I was first introduced to me about 8 years ago when I was transitioning from being a safety engineer as my day job to being a diversity practitioner. And you essentially can think of the evolution of equality being like a pendulum. It swings forward, but it also swings back. And if the majority group in question feel that too much equality or equity is being given out, the brakes come on and you start to see a regression in the evolution of fundamental rights. And if you think about the context of the journey of this, 2014, this is a swinging out of all the positivity in London around the London Olympics, inspiring the next generation in sports, equality and inclusion being at the heart of the games, design, creating a games that would inspire lots of people, and subsequently the design elements that had went into the games then starting to make their way into the civil engineering projects that were coming about at the time. So much positivity, so much realness, pre-Brexit, everything else that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years that really have made more of a regression. So the pendulum swing of equality, if you swing too far forward in one direction and then the masses feel that too much equity has been given out, the brakes come on and you start to swing back. And we're seeing that happen more and more now in society, in particular with trans rights right now, with the conversation and the dialogue that are happening around them. And what I am seeing more and more happen in the training or the facilitation and delivery that we do to everyday engineers in industry is that whatever's happening out there in the world as a social justice movement is increasingly showing up more in the internal narrative of an organization. So 2 or 3 years ago when we were doing focus groups for an institution, the questions that we were being asked were all about Black Lives Matter and white privilege, because that was the movement that was getting the focus from the media at the time. I got asked a question 3 weeks ago in training I was delivering to a client about what my attitude was to trans women participating in sports. So whatever's happening outside is more frequently coming into the discourse internally. So the blend is kind of being fused. And in our role, therefore, as engineers, where we talk about ethics and society and responsible innovation, we have to recognize that these questions are going to be more and more at the front of our mind of our stakeholders and the communities that we're trying to positively influence. So this pendulum swing, it's a question to, it's a very engineering type model as well, you know. It resonates with engineers. So if you're ever trying to articulate, what I hope you can get partly from this presentation as well, is alternative framings about talking about diversity and inclusion to majority groups when they don't quite get it, or they don't quite feel connected or part of it. And one of the workplace culture models that I learned during my time moving into ED&I was around this kind of research. So if I can just explain what each of these mean. This is from research done by, I saw it published in EY, the accountancy firms, the professional services firm, talking about different workplace culture models. You can apply this to any demographic. When in Rome is essentially where, when you are in a business, you exist and they'll treat you with respect, but they don't want to know about what you get up to outside the walls. So you're tolerated, but you're not necessarily celebrated. Do you want to come in? Yeah, come get a seat. The embassy model is where you are protected within the walls of this company. We value you, but beyond the walls of this company, we cannot support you any further. And then an advocate is where when you're in a company, the organization supports you, it has your back, and will use its political might and influence to influence local equality laws, let's say. So this describes it a bit better through the lens of LGBTQ+. Companies adhering to local laws, they may create exceptions, and there's no formal stance on LGBTQ rights. The embassy models is where the companies enforce pro-LGBT models but do not seek to apply them when outside the laws, their walls. And then the advocacy model is a bit like what I described around Airbus using its political might in India. In reality, any company operates in any one of these models at any one time internationally. And it's a case of trying to figure out what is your organisation? What is your organisation's stance? And a recent survey of LGBTQ Americans, of young people in America growing up, now identify that Gen Z, something more than 20-odd%, I think it is, identify as something other than cisgendered or other than fully heterosexual. So if we start thinking about skills and attraction of the future and how we position our industry of wanting to attract people, more and more we need to present our industry as a place that's being open and inclusive for everyone. So these are some slides that I used recently at an elective that I delivered at Imperial College. Their mechanical engineering department actually put aside timetable time last term to deliver 8 lectures, I think it was, 8 2-hour lectures, and I was asked to focus in specifically on LGBTQ in engineering. So some of the students really welcomed that focus because they were looking for jobs now, looking for job searches. So students now, when they're looking up what a company does, they will go on a company's page and look up role models, what it says in their annual report, environmental, social and governance kind of stances, you know. So that's a whistle-stop tour of InterEngineering. And so running a network for LGBTQ engineers, we were having some impact, but we weren't having real impact, real to the bone, to the core, systemic change that was needed. So hence the idea for EqualEngineers. Let's broaden out, create a brand that would apply equal focus to each strategy. And where we've arrived at is offering 4 different types of development: events, recruitment, training, and consulting. With our events portfolio, we run careers fairs, we run an annual conference called the Equality in Engineering Conference, and we run a successful set of awards called the Engineering Talent Awards. Essentially platforms to help companies promote themselves to minoritized groups in engineering. We've recently launched a recruitment service, an active recruitment service, because from our careers fairs last year, we had 2,500 people that attended them, and already we've had 250 people send us their CVs in the last 3 weeks to pre-register for this new service. So we're hoping to get those engineers jobs in the months to come. And then the training consulting is the work that we do with industry to help change the sector as it stands. And I'll go into that in more detail because it's some of that I'm hoping to bring into the academic setting through my time here at UCL. But just looking at the kind of theory of change for these 2 sides to our business, one which is ultimately about trying to get more people from underrepresented groups successfully into careers. I won't go through all the specifics of this slide, but essentially a theory of change diagram looks at what you do now and what the outcomes will be by virtue of you successfully doing each of those components. One of the things we run is a pathways program for our engineering students, where we've helped mentor over 300 engineering students from across the UK in the last 18 months and match them up with mentors from our 6 employer partners. And then the careers fairs are all about helping people see people like them at the events. So the exhibitors, when they come along, they'll get people from their employee networks who run different networks to come along, talk about what it's like to be an engineer at their employer. And ultimately all this converges to them, more people moving in. The other theory of change that we had for the other side of the business was looking at the workforce training that we do, how this feeds into ultimately helping engineering and tech companies have inclusive workforce cultures. And this strand here, universities having an inclusive engineering and technology curriculum, this is very much the strand that I'm looking to really hone in on over the next 3 years, helping universities understand their requirements across different benchmarks, the Association for Higher Education Practice, the Athena Swan Charter, Race Equality Charter, but actually helping lecturers understand their role in helping students see roles in engineering and tech. because it's occurred to me through the work that we're doing that the gateway to industry for students is very often through their academics in terms of how they see a career in engineering. But most academics have worked in academia for most of their career. So it's a slightly skewed perception of what roles in industry can look like. So by starting to get some sort of mix going on for people to understand the need on inclusive design and inclusive cultures, this is sort of one way to do it. This is a very complicated diagram. I was deliberating on whether or not to include it, so happy to circulate if you're interested afterwards. So very often now, our leadership training, we focus in on this diagram. And I can tell you that this, whether you're a chief executive of a FTSE 100 or a new graduate or apprentice just starting in a business, this describes how most of us feel when talking about something that is not what we are. That fear of walking on eggshells, that fear of saying the wrong thing, it puts you off. I'm not going to go down that route. That's Pandora's box over there. Nope. I'm not going to ask any questions. I don't want to know. And by not doing that, we then never have the conversation around things that make us feel uncomfortable and awkward. So white people talking about the experiences of black people, or straight people being active supporters of LGBTQ plus people, or neurotypical people not making the effort to understand neurodiversity, or non-disabled people taking the chance to understand the lived experience of people with disabilities. Being that swan on the surface in that moment where something is shared with you, how you react to someone sharing something with you that might be deeply personal can affect their subsequent recovery or any subsequent actions that they might take. And as a leader, and I often deliver this to leadership teams, what leaders often forget is that their brand, their picture, their signature on an email has an emotional response across the entire worker population. And they get so fearful of this fear of walking on eggshells that they forget the impact that their support for a cause can unravel, can create, the movement it can create in an organization. So by giving leaders a space to just open up, ask questions, share concerns that they've had or that they've never quite connected on, that gives them the chance to properly help support diversity strategies or methods within an organization. Because very often they feel like this swan. They're delivering at a town hall or giving a big presentation to some stakeholders, and they have to be calm and collected on the surface, but actually underneath it, they're struggling. They don't know what to say. They're struggling to keep up. So by creating real models as well as role models, it gives them a chance to explore that. So all this is fine and well, Mark. That's great. But how is this really getting to the core? EqualEngineers set it up in 2017, and it was fine. We were running events. We were getting people coming along. But I really wanted to find something that would land with the majority, the white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical male majority that represents 84% of the engineering profession. And it was in 2018 that we discovered the male suicide rates in the engineering, construction, and manufacturing sectors. And I was really flabbergasted by that. Statistically, you were more likely to die through suicide in engineering than a typical hazard like a dropped object falling from height, electrocution, things that as a technical safety engineer, I used to spend time, money, and effort helping eradicate, minimize, reduce, preventing it from even happening. So we decided to get some of our own research on this. So I commissioned the Masculinity in Engineering survey in 2018. We rolled it out. We had over 800 respondents to this survey, and we had 50 questions on ED&I in engineering, health and safety. The reports are available on our website. And I'm showing you here the 3 questions that still really stand out for me. On the question, do you know of colleagues who've experienced mental health issues? 75% answered yes to this question. When it became more serious, have you ever lost a work colleague to suicide? 18% answered yes to this question. They prefer not to answer, very low there. And then when it became personal, have you ever considered harming yourself or taking your own life? 21% said yes to this question. And you see the prefer not to say jumped up to 6.5%. And the written questions, the written responses behind some of these answers were heart-wrenching. So it occurred to me, isn't it ironic if the intention of our inclusion and belonging programs are to create a place where you can be your whole self, bring your whole self to work, then clearly it's not landing for one of these majority groups. Men were 3.5 times more likely to answer yes to this question than female respondents. So that was where I thought, right, we need to do more on this. And so we created some training courses on inclusion and diversity, centering in on this focus on psychological safety. We did a refresh of this survey in 2021 after the pandemic. And these are some of the findings from that survey. And essentially what to focus in on here is this. The number of people reporting suicidal ideation or self-harm jumped from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4. So it's an issue which has not gone away. If anything, it's gotten worse. So we have a mental health crisis, mental ill health crisis in the sector, and that's not good. We know that some of these issues are a concern as well amongst student populations, and there's a university that we're going to be delivering training to their staff group in a few months' time, and actually they've had within their engineering faculty some student suicides as well. So this is a real issue. This is a real issue that we need to get under the surface of what is causing this and what supports can we put in place. Some of the recommendations we came out with from this report were creating equivalency between physical safety and mental health training. Diversity programs focusing on inclusion and highlighting the toxic and toxic masculinity. What I mean by this up here is engineers understand physical safety. They understand the risks and the hazards and the need for creating safe workplaces in the physical sense. But it's not really trained into us so much from the mental health well-being piece. And there's a big movement now to ensuring psychological safety. So the ability to call out unsafe acts without fear of retribution. I see there being a big opportunity here, taking what we do with engineers on physical safety and creating an equivalent model for psychological safety and saying, hey everyone, that's what this means, using the reporting mechanisms accordingly. Now, I'm talking here from my experience as an industrialist and what we do in industry. There is a lot more work that would need to be done as we extrapolate this downwards in the education and learning tree when it comes to embedding this in the engineering curriculum. But it should be something that we're starting to seed in the minds of the engineers of the future so that they're more aware of it when they come into industry. At a minimum, at best, they're proactively asking engineering employers in the future, what are you doing on this? So, in terms of getting their framing, this model represents an iceberg. And I use this model a lot in my training because it's easy for people to remember. So if you think about an iceberg, it can bob up and down on the surface. Its density can change depending on the water that it's in. You can see more of it, you can see less of it. The point here is that we are so much more beneath our surface than what you can actually see on the surface of who we are. But it takes for moments of connection to get to know what's beneath our surface. And if you think about that waterline for being a proxy for how inclusive your culture is, how inclusive your course is, the more inclusive you are, the lower your waterline will be, the more likely people are to open up about any turbulence going on beneath their waterline, where they're going through a bereavement, financial planning, gambling, addiction issues. whether they're struggling to come out at work, want to transition gender, they're the only black person on site who doesn't see themselves represented, or they're living with postnatal depression after maternity leave. Creating a culture where people can be open about anything going on in their lives. And I don't think we're achieving that even for the male majority that work in the sector. Hence this toxicity that exists, this inability to be vulnerable, to be open up. Because when you get them one-on-one, they can be, but in a group setting, it's like this kind of laddish culture that can be so pervasive at school or in the locker room become the dominant culture, and it's trying to really cut through that. So this is where the concept of allyship comes in. And allyship is where you support a group to which you do not belong. You take that learning experience and try and understand the lived experience of others. And so an ally will make a concerted effort to understand the challenges of other, and it's your role then in creating inclusive cultures. It's almost a gift, actually, from the LGBTQ community to the wider diversity inclusion sphere, because that's where the term allyship originated from. And there's a bit of a continuum now where you think about allyship going from being apathetic, no understanding of the issues, and you gradually progress through to becoming aware, becoming an active supporter, and then becoming a conscious advocate for groups to which you do not belong. The thing is, most people stay in this lane of apathy because it's currently pitched as something separate to everyday engineering. And what we need to do more is interweave the benefits of inclusivity in engineering design to start getting people more along the road of becoming advocates for groups to which they don't belong. And that's really what the centre of our work at EqualEngineers helps do. So I'll talk to you now about, how have we gone about then manifesting this? So as was mentioned in my intro, we've delivered training to thousands of engineers centering on this experience of the male majority. We find it works. It reduces the adversarial reaction that can sometimes come up when you start talking about diversity and inclusion. This feeling of the villagers coming with the pitchforks saying it's your problem for all this inequity, when actually people are just trying to do their day job and don't feel connected to it. So creating space to get people to identify with their own diversity story first, revisit a point in time where they've maybe felt excluded, disenfranchised, been in a minority, that can help create empathy for some groups that experience it much more frequently than others as adults in their professional lives. So with our university work, we are now working with more universities through mostly funded projects through the Diversity Impact Programme from the Royal Academy of Engineering. I'm spotlighting here 3 projects that we're working on that each cover different strands of diversity. So this is a project where we're helping Plymouth look at inclusion for neurodivergent and disabled engineering students. I held a focus group with the students last November, and it was amazing, some of the findings that we unearthed. And then we presented this back to the staff at an all-faculty away day. We've also facilitated engineering guest lecturers who are disabled and neurodivergent to speak about their experiences, and we've given Plymouth access to our Pathways programme to run mentors, to have some of their students join it, and we're also supporting a diversity conference that they're running in a few months. The power in just giving a voice to a group that is traditionally not engaged with has been brilliant. The collective experience that was shared through the neurodivergent and disabled students has really surfaced up some key things for the faculty to consider. And I dare say this isn't unique to that one institution. I'm sure it is applicable at other places. The other project we're supporting is a project for King's College London looking at black engineers, success for black engineers. So here our role is to leverage our experience as running mentoring programs, and essentially we're providing the infrastructure and delivery of their peer-to-peer mentoring programs across their engineering faculty. And we've also given them access to our mentoring platform, which we've recently invested in. This platform has no cap on the number of people that we can have on it. So one of our ambitions is to get every engineering student in the country on it and be facilitating mentoring relationships at scale through this. The final project we're working with through this Royal Academy funding is with De Montfort University and helping their students get access to high-profile jobs. Unfortunately, students at De Montfort University can suffer from the fact that they've not gone to a Russell Group university. So they end up having massive bias in the recruitment rounds, that they don't get as access to as high remunerated engineering jobs as they do compared to other institutions like Imperial, UCL, Oxbridge, etc. And that will simply come down to snobbery and bias when people are looking at which university that you've gone to. So one of the things we're looking at here is helping their students show up, helping their students have that confidence and facilitate connections through our mentoring programs again, but also giving coaching to the project leads and to the staff on how to empower the students themselves as they go forward into industry. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of the three projects we've been working on. We're also running a regional mentoring programme in Edinburgh and South East Scotland through a cluster of universities. And we have some other projects that haven't been announced yet that we're not allowed to talk about. But we will be able to in a few months' time. So how does all that relate to what I'm here for, what we're doing at UCL? I wanted to just paint the backdrop of history up until now, how I've got to where I'm at, and the vista through which we sort of look at the challenges ahead. And I'm really hoping through the time here at UCL, we get a chance to test and trial some ideas. I can lend my time more specifically to those that need it in helping develop pieces. So in the first year, I'm looking at piggybacking onto some sessions that are already in plan and help test some of that training that we're doing with industry on inclusive cultures, the role of ethics, equality, diversity, and inclusion in general, and putting it into practice and seeing some of the feedback that we get. I should have said before, actually, all of this, one of the reasons we decided to embark upon a strategy of working with engineering universities as much as we work with engineering employers was because 3 years ago, I took on 23 student ambassadors from 14 UK universities. And as part of that, we put them through our training that we do with industry to help them see what we're preaching, essentially, to the masses. And a lot of them said, Mark, this is relevant on our course. You know, this should be getting done in our education system. This applies to the culture in our department and to the hostilities that we see across some of the academics that we work with, etc. So this got me thinking, okay, well, clearly there's a need for this. Bring it further down, let's engage early on, and then maybe we do ourselves out of a job in the future because the engineering students coming through are more egalitarian in what they ask in the future. So yes, bringing that in, delivering a VP inaugural lecture, so I can tick that off after tonight. And the fundamental core piece of work will be developing an engineering leadership program. So coming up in this year with what that might look like, what modules might be, what the content of it would be, testing it with a group early next year. So this sort of focusing in on the first year of the curriculum, looking at some of the student design projects. And I really want to bring in that framing around physical safety with psychological safety. Even in my short time since being here, I've since learned that actually the concept of what physical safety is might not resonate as much for some engineering backgrounds. And that's my bias as a chemical engineer, where physical safety is part of our core culture. There might even be some physical safety framing that's needed. Because when you work in industry, when I worked in KBR, I was working with piping, instrumentation designers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. We were all brought together under that common fabric of safety for all. So there's maybe a bit of work that's needed there as well. And then likewise, bringing that workshop idea to staff. Is there something we can do on staff development, building their capability and confidence in talking about inclusive cultures? So doing a workshop for that this year and then piloting it in year 2. Developing pre-recorded content to support online component of the blended approach to first-year students. So, after COVID, not every university has gone straight back to in-person lectures. A blended approach is used here at UCL. So is there content we can develop that helps make it scalable to other year groups with the content that we develop? So all this feeds into this engineering leadership program. And then develop and deliver 3 training sessions to UCL staff on this. Part of this year will also, this workshop here, wasn't related to staff training. It was more to staff engagement to help inform the development of the engineering leadership program to be pitched to students. In year 2, so starting from September, October, next academic year, developing that content and then delivering those sessions. And then in the final year, a wider rollout of the program to students more widely across the faculty. Continuing in-person support for the rollout. So in the pilot that we run early next year, that's not going to involve the entire faculty. The Faculty of Engineering here is massive. So we'll start off with smaller populations, learn from that, iterate, and gradually roll it out. And then hopefully support the development of the curriculum based on the pilot outcomes. So this is a graphic on the structure of engineering at UCL. You see there are sort of 7 main disciplines: civil engineering, biochemical, biomedical, chemical, electrical, and electronic, mechanical, computer science, and management science. The first year sees common, the integrated engineering program structure is unique in that a lot of the students work together on common themes. So mathematical modeling and analysis, engineering challenges, scenarios, and design and professional skills. They cut through most. So you've got students that are working together from students from other departments. So you've inherently got built into the structure of the course this potential for cross-pollination of ideas, the ability for people to connect interpersonally, that whole iceberg analogy that I'm talking about. And so I've been working with John and the team here to identify key moments where my time can be best utilised to get in to support. And one of the key focus areas will be to, you'll notice that once they get to their sort of 3rd year, 4th year, the students have been doing all this integration, but then they're in their core departments. So I'd like to try and look at ways we can bring in this, keep using this collaborative working together once they get into their final years. Because, when you apply for your jobs in your engineering employer, you may have done all this stuff in your 1st, 2nd year, but the fertile soil that's in your mind is the stuff you've done in the last year. So we need to be ensuring that focus on ED&I is continued throughout the projects. One of the main ways that I see this manifesting is through some work that is done in industry. So in industry, it's very common to do something called an EQIA, an Equality Impact Assessment. And this is sometimes done in a university setting where it's looking at the needs and adjustments for an individual if they've got a disability of some sort, for example. But in industry, the term EQIA is done on a much bigger scale when you're looking at the impact on a minoritized group in a particular locality or on a particular project. I'll give you an example. One of our clients was a big highways construction project, building a new crossing down by the Thames. And they were looking at where to put a bridge to cross. And they didn't do their stakeholder engagement early enough. And they just decided on where it was going to be. And it wasn't until much further down the design chain that they realised they were actually increasing the journey time for people rather than trying to reduce the journey time for people. And they had less degrees of freedom in the design to go back and change because orders were already placed. So it was very much a tick box exercise to say that you'd done it rather than doing it very early on and helping it positively influence the design. In safety, this is something that in the design stages, the beginning design stages of a project, it's part and part of the parcel of what you do, inherent safety design workshops. You look at as many different designs as possible and you classify it based on how safe it is. I believe that we should be building in equality impact assessments of some sorts into our engineering projects so that engineers of the future start thinking about how ED&I sits within their engineering. Because there are two ways, ultimately, to talk about inclusion in engineering. It's how inclusive our products or services are on society that we're looking to impact. And it's also the process, the engineering design process of arriving at that. So that comes to then diverse teams, inclusive leadership, the process of actually doing your engineering. Is that inclusive? And then after having done your engineering, the output on society, is it the best it can be for all? And so by getting students thinking about this, I think we will have better versed engineers challenging designs in the future. So ultimately, my overall vision is to have, there's 183,400 engineering students currently studying engineering and technology courses in the UK, according to HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency. Why can't every single one of them get an engineering mentor from industry? There is certainly enough engineers out there that could support that. That is a massive project at scale, but certainly from our Pathways program, where we've been running 300 successful mentor-mentee relationships thus far, the learning for the engineers has been incredible. They've loved having the chance to connect with a future engineering leader, a future engineer, and get excited about how engineering is being taught. And it's been very much a reciprocal arrangement. I think engineering students supporting industry innovation projects during their study is another way to help us almost blend the boundary of engineering recruitment such that students are working on side projects whilst they're doing their degree, they automatically move into industry with those employers. So ad hoc projects that have been on the side burners that employers haven't resourced, offering them up to universities, to students to do, where they get paid a nominal fee per hour. It helps give work experience structured around a degree for degree courses that don't offer a year in industry formally. It helps give people opportunity to work with engineers. More engineering students get jobs in engineering post-study. Well, I think that's a given. And then really, if I were to describe what is the legacy that I want from my professional career, it's that if we plot out the extrapolation of certain minoritized groups that we have the data on, and then we find out we're going to get gender parity by 2080 or whatever it is at the current rate of progress, my time in my organization, EqualEngineers, results in an upswing in that, and results in us also knowing who our engineers are working for us, because we do not have robust, reliable data collection of all diversity strands yet. And I would like to see this need for psychological safety becoming part of core engineering practice, because I think that big alarming rate of suicide rates in our sector is something that can affect anyone, irrespective of background, and that ultimately needs addressing fast. And that's it. Thank you.